let me dispel a myth that has gone around the martial arts circuit for many, many years. And that is the myth that sport karate fighters, and when I say sport karate fighters, let me be explicit, concise. I'm talking about point fighters that have fought for 2 minute and 3 minute matches. They are not real fighters. Do I have your attention? There will be some, and probably more so than not, that are going to contest what I'm saying. That are going to try to disavow this being the truth. But it's a fact. I am not saying that there are not some sport karate point fighters that are indeed great fighters. In a street situation, for example, primarily. But when we say that I've won so many championships and tournaments and grand championships in sport point karate tournaments, open tournaments, sanctioned tournaments, and so forth, does not make for a real fighter. Now, don't forget what I just said. I did qualify what I said by saying that there are some that are indeed great and even excellent or even very good fighters in the street situations. But most of them are not. Anytime you have a referee, judges, a timekeeper, a scorekeeper, and rules governing your fight, then it's not real. Not to say that it does not have some benefit, because it does. I have been a sport martial arts point fighter and kata and weapons competitor for years. And I know that every martial artist or martial arts practitioner that enters into that arena is not a real fighter. I've been a judge and a referee many times over, and I know what I have witnessed with my own eyes. And I have been in the martial arts for 49.2 years. So now, are you going to tell me, someone who has invested that much time in martial arts, that I don't know what I'm talking about? Well, first of all you have is my word. You don't know me. Many of you watching this that may be disillusioned. Many of you watching that may even be haters of what I'm saying, because you may have gained some notoriety, popularity, may have even been in some magazines. I have won many, many first place awards, trophies, plaques, medals, money, grand championships over the years. And I still know that sport martial arts tournaments serve a purpose. They do benefit the competitor or the participant, but it's not real fighting. Real fighting is a different element than sport. You don't have rules. There's no one there to interfere, to interject, to stop you, to give you a point or a score and say begin again. That's not in the street. The street is very different. It is go. Go for what you know. And make the most skilled, advantageous, the most aggressive, the most wise fighter be the victor. Circumstance has everything to do with a defeat or a win as well in the street, if you want to call it a win. Really, it's called survival if you're in that situation where you're defending yourself. But definitely not in a sport point martial arts tournament. Now, as it relates to some competitors and some former champions, like Chuck Norris, for example. And I've got to use him because he always wanted to point out and brag that he was the middleweight champion of the world when people ask him about him and Bruce Lee sparring. He's the principal example that I'm going to use. I've done it over the years, and I'm going to do it again. It's been a while, but I'm going to do it again. He was a sport point karate champion, not a real fighting champion. I give more credit to Benny the Jet Urquidez and Bill Wallace and Howard Johnson and the other competitors that fought in the ring, because that's a different element of fighting. It's continuous. Even though you do have rules, even though you do have a referee, you go for a much longer time or period of time, and you are mano a mano, kicking and punching without being stopped every few seconds. It's not the same. But when you leave the ring, I think that you, and I believe that you, are more capable of protecting yourself in a street situation than an individual just simply a point karate tournament champion. Now, don't forget, might be a little redundant, but I'm going to say it again. There are some point karate champions, point karate competitors that are great fighters in the street. But the vast majority of them that I have seen throughout my career are not. A lot of them have been saved by the bell in some occasions because the heat was too hot from the other competitor who was a greater fighter. I've seen that. I've seen guys come into the ring, wanted to do the tournament type of fighting, and it didn't work on somebody that was aggressive, as if they were in an actual street fight. They couldn't separate the sport from the street fighting when they walked into the ring or on the floor, on the mat. And oftentimes they would be penalized and they would be labeled as someone being excessive or using excessive force, lack of control. But guess what? That was the real fighter in those sport events. Chuck Norris was not one of those guys. Now, is Chuck Norris a good or a great karateka? Yes, he is. Is he a man that trains on a regular basis, even at his age today? Yes, he is. I have a great deal of respect for Chuck Norris, and I've said this in time past, and I'm going to say it again. And if I didn't believe it, I wouldn't be giving him these credentials right now coming from me, or this kudos, as it were. I wouldn't be saying it, period, if I had no interest in him as a martial artist. I do. What I don't like, and I have never liked, and I've said this before, and he's not the only one, but in this particular situation as it relates to Bruce Lee, he's never given Bruce Lee credit for being the martial artist that Bruce Lee was. Chuck Norris used Bruce Lee to get his fame. Had it not been for Bruce Lee entering into Chuck Norris's life, whether Chuck wants to call him a friend of his or not, I'm not going to debate that. But Chuck Norris took advantage of the fact that he knew Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee allowed him to be the villain in Return of the Dragon. And that is where Chuck Norris's martial arts career began, truly in film. That's where his notoriety and his popularity began. And that is why he is where he is today. And everything else was just an extra thing throughout the years. All of the other movies that he did after that, and Walker, Texas Ranger, which was a very good television show and even movie. But it would have not been that way had it not been for Bruce Lee. Chuck Norris would have not ever enjoyed this type of fame throughout his career had it not been for Bruce Lee entering into his life. And Chuck Norris was just a sport karate point champion. So when they asked him about Bruce Lee and him sparring, he said Bruce didn't want to go there and I didn't want to go there. I'm saying to myself, go where? You could have never, ever stood toe to toe with Bruce Lee in a sparring match. Couldn't. I'm not talking about a sport sparring match, which is what Chuck Norris was used to, stopping and starting and the referee interjecting or stopping you and giving you a point and saying, wait a minute, break, and so on and so forth. It would have not been that way with Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee would have just tore into you, and that would have been the end of the story. And that was not something that Chuck Norris was used to. If Bill Wallace and Chuck Norris was in the ring doing full contact, which Chuck Norris was not a full contact fighter, Bill Wallace would have whooped Chuck Norris. If Chuck Norris was in the ring with Joe Louis, God rest his soul now, Joe Louis would have whooped Chuck Norris. If Benny the Jet was in the ring with Chuck Norris, Benny would have whipped Chuck Norris. And most of the other professional fighters that were in the ring who did kickboxing, they would have defeated Chuck Norris. There is no comparison. So, getting back to my original premise of this video, sport point karate does not equal real fighters unless there are some real fighters that participate in that event. But most of them are just simply sport point karate fighters. If they have not had the real life training in their dojo, their dojang, their kuns, then it would show up in the street or not show up. There's some people back in the day, we called them paper tigers. They could go through a kata, they can scream and ki all day long, and they can look really good aesthetically. But when it came to putting gloves on and getting in the ring, especially a boxing ring, utilizing your hands and your feet, most of them would have not survived. That's just an awesome reality. I was there. I've done kickboxing. I've done jiu-jitsu. I've done point karate tournaments, kung fu tournaments. I know. I was there and I've been there. I've refereed and judged many tournaments. And I know for a fact that everyone that says that they're a champion, they're only a champion in that arena, but not in the streets. That was it. And that was all. Let me know what your experience has been, what your opinions are on this particular subject or topic. Make sure that you're not wearing your feelings on your sleeve. Make sure that you talk in good taste. And just an FYI, Michael Jai White was a sport karate tournament fighter. And so was Jean-Claude Van Damme. You can find a few videos of them on YouTube. Now, in my honest viewpoint, and I won't say opinion, in my honest viewpoint, I believe that Michael Jai White would have been a much better fighter than Chuck Norris had they sparred each other. And the same is true with Jean-Claude Van Damme. I believe that he would have been a much better competitor against Chuck Norris. Just my viewpoint from what I have observed over the years and watching film on all three of those gentlemen. And definitely the late Joe Louis. I think Chuck Norris could have not stood toe to toe with him very long in a full contact match. That's just me. What do you think? I'm out.